Now let's take a look at managing our users, and this is considerably more simple than managing logins. But if you remember, logins get our users onto the SQL Server. So here's the security folder for the SQL Server, and here's the login, Frank. But inside our individual databases, now if we look in our databases folder on our server, and we notice that I've got a sales database here that I created. If I look inside the databases hierarchy here, you'll notice there's a security folder in there, and if I expand that, you will see my users, and there's Frank there. So I've allowed Frank to log on to the server. Now I have given Frank access to this particular database. So if I right-click Frank inside the database and go to Properties, I can now work with both the permissions and some general settings on Frank as it pertains to him as a user of this particular database. Notice, first up, we have the username, the default schema, we'll talk about that later. Notice the own schemas. Now this gives you a little hint about what schemas do, because the schema really has to do with the functionality that he has or the scope that he's in. And so if we want Frank to be the database owner, we can click that. Now Frank has really sysadmin rights for this entire database. Then notice down here role members, and this is role memberships, what we want Frank to be, what role he has, and that'll become a little clearer later when we talk about schemas. Now securables, this is the same as before. This is where we would grant access, and I'll show you real quickly here. We're going to look at this again when we talk about managing permissions, but if I want to make sure that Frank has access to one of the tables, notice I can say, I clicked on the add button here, I can say I want to add certain objects to Frank and give him permissions on him, and I click that and I say just tables. So notice the parts table is the only table in the database now. I can now come down here and set permissions on whatever particular aspect. So if I want Frank to be able to select from here, I can grant that. If I want him to be able to insert or delete from this table, I can grant or deny and so forth. Again, we'll dig into that later. Something that's really interesting on the individual user level is extended properties. And I'm going to show you this. For example, we have a certain certification within our company that Human Resources provides. It could be getting along with people, working in a team, sensitivity training, all the stuff that we hear about nowadays. Well, let's say that we want to make sure that some of our people have been certified. So we create a new property called certified, and we can then determine whether or not Frank has been certified. We can simply say yes or no. Now, if we save this, now when we come back in and look at Frank a little later on, notice in our extended properties, we have that out here. This is a way to tack information onto our individual users and keep up with them. So really kind of a cool thing, and that's an extended property on our individual user. So not a whole lot going on here with individual users, but that's how we manage them. Go to the individual user, okay, inside the particular database. And if you right-click that user there and go to properties, that's how we're going to manage our users inside the database.